So you've decided to get into backpacking, and obviously you want your first backpacking trip to go smoothly. Avoiding these mistakes that beginner backpackers often make can go a long way in help making that trip go as smoothly as possible. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Matt. Welcome to Matty Outdoors. All we talk about here is hiking and backpacking. You know, I've got a subscribe button over here. You guys know the drill. Click on that. In today's video, we are going to go over 5 really common mistakes that beginner backpackers are making out on trail. And we're going to talk about a couple ways that we can help mitigate those mistakes so you don't make them on your first trip. Even if you're an experienced backpacker, I guarantee there's going to be some tips in this video that are going to help you out as well. And as always, if there's tips and tricks that I don't talk about in this video that you guys have, drop them in the comments down below. They help everybody out, including myself. And we're going to start off talking with the mistake that people make when it comes to the most important piece of gear when it comes to backpacking, and that is our footwear. We're not going to get into the trail runners versus boots debate. You know, whatever you want to wear, whatever style of footwear is going to suit your backpacking style and the trips that you do. What we're actually talking about in today's video is when it comes to the footwear of choice for your backpacking trip, making sure that that shoe or that boot is going to fit your foot properly. Far too often new backpackers fall into price shopping when it comes to their backpacking gear. I'm sure any of us experienced hikers, you know, we can remember going and, you know, buying one of your first pair of backpacking boots, and, you know, you look and, you know, you see these $200 to $300 to $400 to $500 boots, and a lot of newer backpackers tend to do price shopping, and, you know, they go to the discount section or they look for the cheaper brand of boots, or, you know, the cheaper footwear that's out there. Make sure you go into a store, get your feet sized properly, make sure that you're finding the right boot or the right shoe for your foot. And when you buy these boots or shoes and you take them home, make sure you try them out a little bit before you take them out on a backpacking trip. Diving into mistake number 2, we're going to talk about electronics a little bit. It's the 21st century. Electronics are out there. They help make backpacking trips more comfortable. They can save you in a pinch out in the backcountry. One of the big mistakes that people are making out there, we've got the nice little headlamps, we got our in-reach devices, and I'm sure most of us are using our cell phones to take pictures out there, or, you know, tracking our routes on our cell phone. If you guys didn't know, if you put your cell phone in airplane mode, the GPS on your cell phone will still work. So you can use programs like Gaia. Great way if you don't have a secondary GPS unit, you can just use your cell phone as your backcountry GPS. One of the big mistakes that a lot of newer backpackers don't really think of, or they just, you know, it's really easy to slip your mind, having a way to keep those electronic devices topped up, and something as simple as carrying, you know, a really lightweight little battery bank. 10,000 milliamp battery bank. With this guy here, you know, I can easily keep all of my electronics charged up, you know, stuff like my cell phone. I can keep my inReach topped up and keep my headlamp topped up, you know, for up to a 3 to 4 day backpacking trip. The weight on this one is about 9 ounces. I know they have a couple lighter ones out there, you know, like this really sweet Nightcore one. If you have electronics out there, carry something that can keep them topped up. Number 3 is just biting off more than you can chew. And when I say that, I mean, you know, just overestimating things like the distance of the hike, the elevation gains of the hike, and even hiking with the weight of your backpacking gear on your back. I know a lot of people getting into backpacking come from a day hiking background where, you know, you don't necessarily have as much gear or as heavy a gear. So, you know, pounding out a 20-kilometer day with day hiking gear is much different than pounding out a 20-kilometer day with a full backpacking gear loadout, especially the traditional backpacking gear that newer backpackers have. Almost all of us start out, you know, hiking with heavier gear. You know, we get a lot of used gear, we buy a lot of kind of discount, cheaper gear. It's bulkier, it's heavier, you know, it makes sense. We're kind of getting into the sport. We don't necessarily know if we're going to love it. So why drop all, you know, these thousands of dollars buying the top of the line ultralight gear for, you know, a sport or hobby that we might not know we're going to be into. If it's one of your first or second trips and you're not really accustomed to, you know, like I said, the weight of the gear, the distance you're hiking, the elevation gains, start out with a couple smaller trips, you know, something shorter, get yourself accustomed to the distance, the weight, and some of the gear that you're going to be using out on that trip. Now, change the scene here and have it not be sunny outside, and picture it being ridiculously dark, ridiculously cloudy. What you have in front of you would be a pretty common sight at a backcountry campsite when you're out on a backpacking trip. You know, you're going to have your tent all nice and closed up, and you're nice and sealed off and protected from the weather. Now, if you backpack for any amount of time, inevitably you are going to get caught out in some foul weather, and, you know, you're going to find yourself in a situation like this where your tent is all buttoned down and you're just huddling inside. And a really big issue that tends to happen when the shelter gets sealed up like this is condensation. One of those things that can very easily ruin even the best backpacking trip. And you're inside your shelter and everything in your shelter is just as wet as it is outside when it's pouring. It sucks. It's absolute hell. I've been there. And some things that I have picked up over the years that have really helped me cut down and mitigate condensation are things like making sure all of the vents on your shelter are open. Almost all backpacking tents are going to have, vents usually at the peaks or somewhere along the walls, and you can open those up. But there's some more things that you can do to help mitigate the amount of condensation that's going to build up inside your tent. One of my favorite ones is, instead of keeping the door of my tent completely closed throughout the night, I will zip my door, halfway open. That much more airflow through the shelter really helps. It just promotes more airflow throughout, and like I said before, with the vents up top, it's going to help eliminate a lot of the condensation that's going to build up on the inside of the walls of your tent. I always make sure that all of the guy lines on my tent are guyed out. A lot of the guy lines on tents, especially ones down near the bottom of the rainfly, will really help open up and help promote airflow. As you can see, by pulling that guy line out, it's lifted up the bottom of my tent quite a bit, and it just gives a little bit more room for air to flow through, and it really helps eliminate the condensation. For tip number 5, we're sticking with shelters, and this tip applies to newer backpackers as well as the older experienced backpackers. And when we're first getting out and backpacking, we're going to pick up a shelter, and it's generally it's a new to us shelter, right? A newer tent or a used tent. Really important for us to know how that shelter is going to work when we're out in the backcountry. Like I said in the previous tip, rain is an inevitable thing when you're out on a backpacking trip. Eventually we're going to get hit with a storm. The biggest advice I can give you on this one is setting up your shelter at home in a controlled environment is going to give you the know-how of each part and kind of how it works. The more times you set it up, the quicker you're going to get. But where this also really helps you out is you are going to know, and you're going to guarantee that you have all of the parts for that tent before you head out on a backpacking trip. I know it's not super common, but it does happen from time to time. You pick up a tent and it's missing guy lines, or you don't have enough stakes, or it's just missing parts altogether. I have a friend who picked up an MSR tent that was missing half of the set of poles. Had they got out on a backpacking trip, it would have been nearly impossible to get this shelter set up. So just making sure when you pick up a new tent, especially a new tent, making sure that we're familiarizing ourselves with the setup process, making sure we familiarize ourselves with all of the poles and all of the features of the tent. And even like I'm doing tonight, the reason I actually have this tent set up is, it may surprise you with the gorgeous weather I'm dealing with right now, but it is supposed to storm later on this afternoon into the evening, and I set up my trusty Lancashire 1.5P just because I want to see if there's any spots of seam sealing that I need to go over and touch up on. So even for the experienced backpackers out there, taking our shelter out in the early summer or late spring, kind of like I always do, when I know I'm going to expect crappy weather overnight, I'll set my tent up in the yard and I'll let it hang out overnight, let it get poured on, and make sure that I'm going to have no leaks inside the tent, because I don't want to get wet when I'm out in the backcountry. If you guys are looking for more ways to make your backpacking trips comfortable, I've got an entire playlist right here on weight-saving backpacking tips, and a video down here that I'm sure you guys will enjoy. And as always, I'm Matty. Thank you so dang much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.